Welcome to this explainer. If you really want to understand ancient Rome, you have to do something that's actually incredibly difficult. You have to take off your modern lenses. Applying our modern logic, our morality, and our 21st century expectations to ancient history, well, it's just a massive mistake. To truly grasp why the Romans did what they did, we literally have to upload their mental software. We have to look at the world through the eyes of an ancient Roman. And that means understanding a worldview defined by intense ancestral values, a very strict family structure, and a highly transactional religion.
To see just how deeply ingrained these traditional values were in the Roman psyche, we really only have to look at their language. Take this quote: "Old meant good because tested by experience. New things, or res novae in Latin, was the Roman expression meaning revolution." Think about that for a second. For a Roman, innovation was not something to be celebrated. It wasn't a cool tech startup. New meant dangerous. It meant untested. It meant the potential for chaos and violence. They were absolutely fiercely protective of the past.
Okay, let's dive right into the structure. Today, we're going to dismantle this Roman worldview piece by piece. We'll start with 1, the way of the elders, move into 2, the patron-client web, then look at 3, the power of the father, 4, Roman women in education, and finally 5, transactional gods and faith.
Let's get started with Section 1, the way of the elders, decoding Roman values.
Let's look at the very foundation of Roman society, the core mental software of a Roman citizen. They called this value system mos maiorum, which translates to the way of the elders, and it was built on a few completely non-negotiable pillars. First up is virtus, or uprightness. Now, in the ancient Roman mind, virtus meant a very specific hierarchy of loyalty. Your country came first, your family second, and your own self-interest dead last. Then you've got fides, meaning faithfulness, keeping your obligations no matter what. Pietas was this deep, profound respect and duty to your elders and the gods. And the ultimate reward for living all of this out was dignitas, your status, your prestige, the respect you commanded from everyone around you.
What's really fascinating here is how the Romans took these abstract concepts and made them totally inescapable in daily life. Just look at this silver coin from 47 BC. It features a profile of fides, faithfulness, depicted as a literal divine being. They anchor this high-minded value to a physical artifact that everyday Romans carried around in their pockets. You literally couldn't even buy a loaf of bread without being reminded of your moral obligations to your community.
Moving on to Section 2, the patron-client web, a hierarchy of favors.
So these values we just talked about didn't exist in a vacuum. They actually built an interlocking, almost mafia-like web of favors and respect that ran up and down the entire social ladder. Roman society operated on a massive system of patrons and clients. It was a reciprocal but highly asymmetrical relationship. On one side, you have the patron, a guy of superior social status who provided beneficia, meaning kindnesses, like legal help or financial support. On the other side, you have the client, someone of lower status who owed officia or duties in return. Clients paid the patron back with their votes during elections, and by giving him very specific daily attention to boost his public image.
For the Roman elite, maintaining this web was literally a full-time job. Wealthy patrons would spend staggering amounts of money to provide food and legal defense for their clients. Why? Because to build your dignitas, that crucial social status, you needed a visible swarm of clients. Every single morning, these clients would gather at the patron's house and then follow him into the Roman Forum like this massive, intimidating entourage. Basically, a crowded house meant you were a successful man. But it wasn't just casual networking. This was legally binding. Rome's first written laws, the 12 Tables, explicitly stated that any patron who cheated his client became a criminal outlaw.
All right, Section 3, the power of the father inside the Roman household.
Let's step away from the public forum and head behind closed doors to look at the absolute legal dominance of the family patriarch. This is honestly one of the most intense concepts in Roman law. Patria potestas, the power of the father. The oldest male in the household legally owned all the property, and incredibly, he held the power of life and death over everyone in his house, even his adult children. But here is the fascinating paradox. Fathers rarely actually use this lethal power. Executing an adult son without a massive reason, like state treason, was basically unheard of. In reality, before making any major family decision, a Roman father would almost always rely on a council of his closest friends for advice. They sought consensus rather than just acting as a lone tyrant.
And the ultimate visual representation of this deep family reverence was the legendary Roman ancestor Aeneas, fleeing the burning city of Troy while literally carrying his elderly father on his back. This right here is the ultimate visual of pietas. It wasn't just about religious piety, it was the supreme duty, devotion and respect toward your elders and ancestors. It was the absolute gold standard for how a Roman son was supposed to behave.
Section 4. Roman Women in Education, the Power Behind the Scenes.
Now, if you're thinking Rome was strictly a man's world where women had zero agency, you'd actually be mistaken. The famous Roman senator Cato the Elder once half-jokingly grumbled, "All mankind rule their wives, we rule all mankind, and our wives rule us." Obviously, women couldn't vote or hold government office, but Cato's quip perfectly captures the massive, indirect political power women held over the men who actually ran the state.
So the crucial point here is that the reality for Roman women heavily defies our modern assumptions about ancient patriarchy. Because life expectancies were short, by the time many women married in their late teens, their fathers had often already passed away. That meant they were actually free from that overarching power of the father. Elite women managed huge family properties, they oversaw the crucial moral education of their kids, and archaeological evidence even shows some women owned massive industrial businesses, like brick-making companies. Take Cornelia, for example, a famous Roman mother who actually turned down a marriage proposal from the king of Egypt just so she could personally manage her estate and educate her brilliant future politician sons.
Speaking of education, for an elite Roman boy, the entire goal of schooling basically boiled down to one single thing: rhetoric. Public speaking was the ultimate weapon. It was how you won elections, built political coalitions, and completely dominated the law courts. Remember, Rome didn't have state prosecutors. If you wanted someone taken down, you or a friend had to literally stand up and speak against them in court. The legendary Cicero is the prime example of this. He essentially spoke his way to the very top of Roman society, terrifying his rivals with his verbal skills alone.
All right, let's head into our final section. Section 5, Transactional Gods and Faith, the Pax Dior.
Finally, let's look to the sky. Roman religion was completely different from what most of us think of when we hear the word religion today. This quote from Cicero is absolutely going to blow your mind if you're looking at this through a modern lens. Jupiter is called the best and greatest not because he makes us just or moderate or wise, but because he makes us safe and rich. The Roman gods were not the source of human-to-human morality. They did not hand down a list of moral commandments about being a good neighbor. No, they were powerful beings who cared about exact, specific rituals. It was a strict transactional contract. You give the gods their honors, and in return, they keep the state safe and wealthy.
The Romans called this contract the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, and maintaining it meant unimaginable pressure. Priests had to recite ancient prayers with absolute strict adherence. If a priest mispronounced literally a single word in a prayer, they had to start the entire ritual over from scratch to avoid divine wrath. Then you had the Vestal Virgins, who guarded the eternal flame of Rome. If that flame went out, Romans believed the state was in dire peril. And if a Vestal Virgin broke her vow of chastity, the punishment was terrifying. She was carried out on a funeral bed and walled up underground to die. The stakes for pleasing the gods were literally life and death for the entire nation.
But, even the Romans knew they needed a pressure valve for all this rigidity. Enter the Saturnalia paradox. During this wonder festival, the incredibly strict social order was purposefully turned completely upside down. Masters would literally act as waiters and serve feasts to their own slaves. It sounds totally crazy for such a status-obsessed society, but paradoxically, flipping the hierarchy like that released all the pent-up tension between the classes. It actually served to reinforce and stabilize their rigid slave-master system for the rest of the year.
And this grand, state-level religion built all the way down to the micro-level too. Look at this painting from a family shrine inside a house in Pompeii. Every single home had a cabinet like this to worship the lares and penates, the spirits of the pantry and the ancestors. Daily life was just steeped in religious rituals, from breastfeeding a baby to fertilizing crops. It constantly connected families back to that core value of the way of the elders, reminding them every single day to live up to the virtuous ideals of their ancestors.
Which brings us to our final, lingering thought. We've seen how the way of the elders demanded virtus, putting the state above the self. Yet, the entire system rewarded individuals with dignitas, wealth, and extreme personal status for their successes. So I leave you with this question. If the system demanded selfless service, how did this relentless, crushing pursuit of individual status and wealth eventually spark the violent civil wars that completely destroyed the Roman Republic? It's the ultimate paradox of human ambition, and understanding it is absolutely the key to everything that happens next in Roman history.